because I had written down 6:20, so we'd be missing a whole.
Oh yeah, we can't miss the rise of the feminine here. That's for sure. So I'm thinking about starting in the summertime after Confluence. I'm thinking of starting a daily current affairs program at some hour, not at 7 o'clock in the morning for Taos. So I'm going to just put the Confluence link in here. So there, okay. And, let's see. People are sleeping in today.
Yeah, I woke up at, I guess, 5:15, and
5:15 this morning.
Yeah, and I look over. It's like I open my eyes. I look over at the window. I'm like, the light's wrong. Why didn't my alarm go off? And it's like, no, the days are getting longer and longer and starting earlier and earlier. And it just this morning was look over, and a certain amount of light in the blinds means, well, you better get the heck up. It's like, and it's like, no, I still had 30 more minutes.
Yeah. So what do you think about that idea of doing just a sort of an open mic, maybe with some interviews, daily program? Because we seem to attract people to the channel, no problem.
You know, I like the idea. I'm
not proposing that you do it.
No. I like the idea. I'm meeting with someone tonight to discuss the TV show I still have not done a dang thing about, for Wednesday evenings. And I think for me, it'd probably just be, how do I integrate it into my Plaza schedule?
Oh yeah, I'm not suggesting that you participate in it necessarily. It's not going to be direct. I mean, I'm going to try to interlace some Jung into it, but I want to talk about it from the collective level, not from the individual level, and what's going on in the world, what's going on in politics, and that sort of thing.
I kind of like it as a Walter Cronkite, and that's the news today. And actually, there's some news instead of the sound bites and out of context pictures that are then made, stories made up that are frankly irrelevant and biased. I mean,
well,
it used to be the only fake news was in the National Enquirer in the grocery store, line, and it just got everybody laughing. Dog with 3 heads resists name Cerberus. I mean, it's like,
yeah. Oh, that's good.
Or won't answer. Won't come to the name Cerberus. It's like,
right. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about the feminine very heavily today, and the emergence of the feminine, and we could also say God's better half. And so
a woman instead of a man.
Yeah, a woman. And so in order to sort of provide a preface to the first paragraph we're going to deal with, I'm going to go back one paragraph to paragraph 611. And here it says, it is worthwhile to examine this text more closely. I guess I better go back and look at the text.
I wonder if we just read.
All right. Well, I think
birthing that came out of the mouth of the Most High.
Yeah, I think we have to go back to 610 to the feminine wisdom announcing herself. And so I will do that, and then through 611, and then we'll let you do the next paragraph. All right. So one of the things that nobody ever talked about in my Sunday school was that already in the Old Testament, the fathers of the church were identifying wisdom with the feminine. And boy, I certainly never heard that in the Marine Corps. They don't want you to have any wisdom. They just want you to.
Right.
And so here in answer to Job, Jung is quoting from Proverbs 8, and Proverbs 8 is one of the key provisions in the Old Testament where wisdom, which is also Sophia, is introduced. Now, keep in mind that the word philosophy means love of Sophia or love of wisdom. So the whole idea of philosophy comes with the idea of wisdom.
Yeah, the philosoph.
Yeah. So it's love of Sophie, love of Sophia. And so all of philosophy is under that rubric. And most people don't know that, but that's where wisdom is. But once you're in philosophy, you're already back in the logos again, where you're creating ruts in the psychic road so that people stay on the logos side through words. So anyway.
Well, what makes me wonder, actually, you're one of your favorite, jokes. If a man says something in the forest, and no one's around to hear it, or no woman's around to hear it, is he still wrong? Well, is that a Sophia joke, actually?
Yeah,
because then the woman is the one with the wisdom.
Right. Well, but I mean, it works the other way too. If a woman is alone in the desert and no man hears her, is she still wrong? And the answer is also yes.
And then a woman, a friend of mine, might turn around and say, "Well, if I'm alone in the desert, why would I use words?" It's like,
yeah, exactly. So anyway, so we're going to read about wisdom and what she says of herself first, and then get into this reading for today. So here wisdom says of herself, and I'm reading from excerpts from Proverbs 8, according to the footnote from Dr. Jung. I came out of the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth as a cloud. I dwelt in high places, and my throne is in a cloudy pillar. I alone encompassed the circuit of heaven and walked in the bottom of the deep. I had power over the waves of the sea and over all of the earth and over every people and nation. He created me from the beginning, before the world, and I shall never fail. In the holy tabernacle, I served before him, and so was I established in Sion. Likewise, in the beloved city, he gave me rest, and in Jerusalem was my power. I exalted like a cedar in Libanus, a cedar in Lebanon, and as a cypress tree upon the mountains of Hermon. I was exalted like a palm tree in Engedi, and as a rose plant in Jericho, as a fair olive tree in a pleasant field, and grew up as the plane tree by the water. I gave a sweet smell like cinnamon and aspalathes, and I yielded a pleasant odor like the best myrrh. As the turpentine tree, I stretch out my branches, and my branches are the branches of honor and grace. Page. As the vine brought I forth pleasant savor, and by flowers are the fruit of honor and riches. I am the mother of fair love and fear and knowledge and holy hope. I therefore, being eternal, am given to all my children which are chosen of him. Okay, then paragraph 611. It is worthwhile to examine this text more closely. Wisdom describes herself, in effect, as the Logos, the Word of God. I came out of the mouth of the Most High. As Ruach, the Spirit of God, she brooded over the waters of the beginning. Like God, she has her throne in heaven. As the cosmogonic Pneuma, she pervades heaven and earth and all created things. She corresponds in almost every feature to the Logos of St. John. We shall see below how far this connects. That's that paragraph. You want to address that?
The thing that jumps out to me most first was when she says, "And in Jerusalem was my power," because historically Jerusalem was the confluence. It was the non-judgmental place. The Crusaders, the Muslims, anyone there was fine. And in a sense, it was a safe zone, but a very active zone. So the peace in Jerusalem wasn't all peace and quiet. I mean, it was vigorous. Big merchant town. And at the same time, still is, but and in Jerusalem was my power. And so in that sense, it's all life comes through Jerusalem.
Right. And in order for people to understand, because I did not understand until I physically went to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem is basically in a natural fortress. It's people were down by the Sea of Galilee and so on, but Jerusalem is way high up in the hills above the coast, and it's very rugged terrain to get up there. And there are only, even today, there are only a few roads that go up to Jerusalem. And, in those days, they must have been like camel tracks and that sort of thing that went up to Jerusalem. But then once you got up to Jerusalem, it was like this beautiful bowl out in front of you where the Garden of Olives and all those things are present in this kind of bowl. And the whole place of Jerusalem is just surrounded by these impossible hills. And so no enemy could get up there very easily. And if they were coming up, you could take them one at a time. It wasn't like they could come at you across a 300-mile front. And this is very evident when you're in Jerusalem, but it's not easy to see, to understand that just from the Bible. And I never really appreciated it. And finally, when I saw it, I said, wow, no wonder.
Well, that natural fortification quality of some cities, Bagnoregio, Italy, comes to mind, Bagnoreggio. And it's basically a landlocked island. There's just a circular valley around this flat-ish, hilly top. And the funny thing is they had very few invaders, because what they had their bridge that went across the valley, always made of wood, never made of stone, and rigged to where they could yank it and light it and make the bridge go away. When people came to invade, usually when they're on the bridge, they'd hear, cloppity clop. They're like, "Oh, time to have a party." And
right.
They would yank the bridge, and then they would have like a citywide party for 3 or 4 days, until the other people got bored enough and frustrated enough and had left. And then they go build the bridge back so they could get back out. But those fortified towns have a certain, I think, a certain humor in their sovereignty. And I think that's part of Jerusalem. Maybe once you got up there, you were too tired to fight, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's like mountain climbing, I'm sure. I mean, I went up in a Mercedes, but
Yeah.
you know, it wasn't difficult for me, but I'm sure people that were trying to get up there with camels and maybe horses, probably mostly camels, would have had a hard time to get up there, and certainly
Right.
to prepare any sort of attack. And so you know, they, you know, could defend it, and therefore they were able to build the Temple of Solomon,
Right.
you know, what, 1100 years before Christ, I guess. And
Yeah, they could almost defend it from their coffee table. You know, they have, you know, one
Sure.
hand here and a crossbow there, and nope, okay, there's another one. So you were saying,
Right.
you know, it's like
that's right. Absolutely.
It's not even interrupted.
Right. And the Temple of Solomon was quite a structure. It was an incredible structure. And just to talk about it a little bit, everyone probably knows about the West Wall, the Wailing Wall,
Right.
in Jerusalem. And I was privileged to have a guide for a day, just me, a private guide. And he had a Mercedes, so he drove me up there and then showed me around. And I was able, because I'm a man, to go back in this tunnel that's next to what we think of as the Wailing Wall. And back there in that passageway, there are also many very observant Jews praying in there. And one of the interesting things is that they have an excavation that goes directly down, almost like a well, and they have it lit so that you can see it. And it goes down about 60 feet. So the wall, when you're in the plaza in front of the Wailing Wall, the West Wall, you're on a level that's about 60 feet at least above the level of the original wall of the Temple of Solomon. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, really an incredible structure that was built there. And of course, in, I don't know, 550 BC or something like that, the Byzantine Empire came in and managed to defeat the Jews and destroyed the temple. And so apparently the only part of the original temple that's now visible is the Wailing Wall. But the structure of the whole thing, if it were fully excavated, would be an incredible thing. Mm-hmm. Truly incredible. And so anyway, I was duly impressed by that, and the fact that they could even do that at a time that was 1100 years before Christ. I mean, mm-hmm. Obviously it probably took them 100 years to build it. And
you know, and I've looked at that a lot. I mean, as a former architect, you know, how were the pyramids built? How were megalithic structures built? How was Jerusalem, cities of that scale, even in their monuments and such, just the lifting, and you know, whether they used harmonics and sound, or, you know, wetted the mud and pushed, you know, mm-hmm. There's just so much we don't know, which contributes to the mystery, honestly, about, wow, we'd have trouble doing this today. I mean, this would
even today,
this would be over budget. I mean, kind of thing. And
yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at some friends on the YouTube channel chat, which are decided to talk about Bitcoin, and that is not the topic of this website. I'm going to leave Torup's one brief comment there, but after that, anymore, and I'm going to have to hide you from the channel. So please be careful.
I have to say, I don't know if each and every generation's cold calling sales pitch stuff, I don't know if they realize how put off that is, how unsalesy, how bad for marketing that is. Just FYI, everybody out there, you can ask a million people if they'll buy something, and if one does, cool, but that's indiscriminate. And if you can't stay on a topic, or wander off to be off topic in a related way, I just have to say that's poor salesmanship. Okay. Just trying to blast it everywhere. Anyway, that's off my soapbox.
Right. Okay. So I've just put my final and last word out on this. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to talk about in this from this paragraph 611 is that, yes, this is the Logos of St. John, and the Logos as envisioned by Philo the Jew was what we today would call rationality. And unfortunately,
right.
What was missed, and has also been missed by Christianity, is that we don't live in the Logos. Okay, it's nice to discern things and to realize what's what, but everything that happens to us in our lives is over on the Eros side. Both chaos, certainly there's chaos in the world, but also we live our lives in the Eros. And and if you look around your room, I just say this very often so people remember it. If you look around your room, and what you will see is that everything except potted plants and pets and people, everything else is dead. It's not alive. It's physically not alive. And the only things that are alive are the humans, the pets, and potted plants, maybe, and nothing else. And those all live their lives on the Eros side of the equation. And this is what we have to start to become conscious of as human beings, that there is an important access to the feminine side. And we're seeing, Dr. Jung used to call the opposite of love, the opposite of love is the power devil. And we're seeing that very, very clearly with Vladimir Putin. Who ever would have imagined that any human being would do the kinds of things that he's been doing in Ukraine, and just destroying communities entirely. Okay, maybe that's what happened when the Byzantines came into Jerusalem in 550 BC, because they tore down the temple. But holy smokes, haven't we developed beyond that?
Well, yeah, it's the bully tantrum on the playground, and if you take two kindergartners fighting, it's just a bunch of wailing hands over top and haymakers and this and that until someone gets lucky, and then the fist hits the nose, and if that person doesn't hurt their hand, there's crying and the fight's over. But that feels like how amateur this is in terms of the bully. You get that look in the eyes, and you get that seething rage, which is so juvenile, honestly.
Right. And it's indicative of someone who's actually a coward.
It is. It is. And my philosophy is the person who throws the first punch already lost the fight. because they
Right.
threw the first punch because they thought everyone else was disparaging them, and somehow they had lost favor. So now they have to prove it. And that's just surrogate parenting. That's just someone needing approval, but that's someone definitely who is not unthreatened. They are very much coward. And honestly, the word, the Spartan, the Spartan slang comes about where, when someone says, "Oh, you're a puss," well, that has nothing to do with female genitalia. It has to do with their pusillanimous. They're cowardly. They're weak. And just like you said, that's cowardly.
Yeah. Okay. So Torp asks a reasonable question here, which is the individual truly the most infringed minority? Well, surely that is true. But as we form ourselves in collectives, we have to maintain our balance. That's the key thing, because what we see in Russia right now is an entire imbalance based on this hyper masculine, where if you say one thing bad about me, I'm going to murder you and your family. Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, that goes just so far until people realize that, that's the way this person is, and then they get rid of them.
Well, and what's interesting about that is that means that they are now threatening you with their own insecurity.
Exactly. And as Gandhi is noted to have said, throughout history, there have been tyrants, and for a time they can seem very strong, but in the end, they always fail. Think of it, always.
Well, the Christmas present glow, the blushes
Right.
off the rose. It's like,
right. So we can't have an entirely feminine society either, because we do have to be able to protect our lifestyle and our living, and so there has to be a balance. And it's all well and good for women to want to be men and to do male things, and some women are called to that. We have women F-18 pilots in the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps now, and we have there's a woman captain of an aircraft carrier now. So some women are called to it, but in essence, it's the archetypal role of the man to protect the family, the society, whatever, so that the women can raise the next generation. And if those aren't protected, then you see what happens. And we're just seeing a graphic example of that in Ukraine right now.
Two quotes that come to mind. One, I don't know if it was Anais Nin, when a student told her she wanted to be as strong and powerful as a man, and she said, "Oh, honey, don't set your sights so low."
Right. Yeah.
And then to me, it's even, the whole phrase "to stop and smell the roses." It has nothing to do with taking time out. It has to do with seeing, and then you will also notice there are thorns, even in the beauty. And so you get a whole picture there of wonderful fragrance, beautiful sight. And it's not, don't get too comfortable. It's, oh, well, everything must be taken care with, because if you just, indiscriminately reach out and grab, ow, 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 you're going to grab the thorns.
Absolutely.
So whole picture, just, I think of the condition of life and that stop and smell the roses, not as some lazy thing to take time out of your day. It's, well, to be aware of what's probably going on in the rest of your day.
Well, it's life itself. I mean, yes, there's chaos out there. Chaos is a meteor, or a comet or something like that hitting the Earth. That's true chaos. Okay, and obviously that's happened here. Whatever it is, 650 million years before Christ, there was a big object that hit the Earth, and it killed all the dinosaurs. But fortunately, it didn't kill all life. So we can exist today. But these big animals that needed lots of vegetation to eat died off, and so we haven't had to deal with those in modern times or even ancient times. They were gone long before we came on the scene. But one does wonder whether the legends of dinosaurs or of dragons and things came from people in ancient Europe, let's say, actually finding dinosaur bones and thinking that they were living creatures in their time, not knowing that they went extinct 650 million years ago.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, that whole piece there is Gary Larson's The Far Side. There's two dinosaurs standing on the beach, and this big boat way off on the horizon is a Noah, obviously, and they're like, "Oh shit, that was today." So be on time. Punctuality has its merits,
right.
like lack of extinction.
Right. So let's look alive and recognize that the feminine has a place, and it's an important place. If whole societies are recreated by the women of the society, and when you see 4 or 5 million Ukrainians going outside of Ukraine that are women and children, well, why is that? Because after the men defend the country, you're going to have to replenish this generation of Ukrainians, and you can't do it with men, so you have to do it with women and the children that survive.
Well, and bringing up chaos and nature, to me, they're not the same thing. People often equate nature as chaos, and I used to, but the more I think about it, nature needs no order. And so nature is the perfect dance combination of the masculine and the feminine, the action of the weather and the creation of the tides and land, etc. And it's interesting to me that nature does not know the line. There are straight lines here and there for a while, but they don't last very long. And it's as if nature doesn't get ultra fascinated by being too rigorously ordered. The discipline is continuation, and I guess endurance is a quality there. But it's interesting to me that the Logos of St. John, that comes to be reason. In the end, reasons are almost all unreasonable, and intention isn't overrated, but the way it comes across is more important. The actions that drive what's happening.
Right, and the point that Jung made in the Red Book is that that John used Philo the Jew's representation of the Logos as in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I've always resisted that, because how can God be a word, a bunch of ink printed on a page? And Jung points out that John used Philo so that he would have something next to light. Okay, so that there would be a balance to the light that John was talking about. And so that's the eros, the light that is presented in Jesus Christ, for example, as one individual. And so, good morning, Susan. Nice to see you today.
Hey, Susan.
And so, anyway, John, okay, he needed discernment, which is what the word refers to, the logos. But that's not where life is. Okay, life is in the eros, and so we need to understand that. So, having said that, we've gone 40 minutes into the session here, and we haven't really started the reading for the day. So
that's fine. And I let me add just one thing about that word as something next to the light. The two concepts I would associate with that, one are that the name of God was ineffable. So you get that, but the word being a symbol, it is also infinite, infinitely interpretable, infinite meanings, infinite. It's basically alive in that sense. Now, the second word, not so much. Then we start to dial into reason, syntax, and all those things. But I think the ineffable name of that capital W word is an important eros concept. Then that's when I think bipartite, the split comes between, well, one or the other, choose. And it's not a choose, it's a both. So as a thought.
And so even the ancient Jews, when they were writing Proverbs 8 said, I came out of the mouth of the Most High. So that's a metaphor for human beings being able to communicate and talk about God, but there's no word that is God, because God is beyond description.
And I think mouth can mislead us, because the mouth of a river, mouth really means origin, rather than, I speak with my mouth. We're not talking about that literal piece there. It's more of the metaphorical origin, say the mouth of a river, be it origin or where it leads to the sea kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So,
all right, so
let's see.
Shall I do 612, or do you have a comment there?
Oh, I see that I put this information on the chat, but I didn't put it on the right chat. I put it on the Zoom chat, so I have to do some things. So yes, please read
612, paragraph 612.
Yes. Yep.
She is the feminine Newman of the, in quotes, metropolis, par excellence, of Jerusalem, the mother city. She is the mother beloved, a reflection of Ishtar, the pagan city goddess. This is confirmed by the detailed comparison of capital W wisdom with trees, such as cedar, palm, terebinth, which is the turpentine tree, olive, cypress, etc. All these trees have, from ancient times, been symbols of the Semitic love and mother goddess. A holy tree always stood beside her altar on high places. In the Old Testament, oaks and terebinths are oracle trees. God or angels are said to appear in or beside trees. David consulted a mulberry tree oracle. The tree in Babylon represented Tammuz, the sun lover, just as it represented Osiris, Adonis, Attis, Dionysus, the young dying gods of the Near East. All these symbolic attributes also occur in the Song of Songs as characteristics of the sponsus as well as the sponsa. The vine, the grape, the vine flower, and the vineyard play a significant role here. The beloved is like an apple tree. She shall come down from the mountains, the cult places of the mother goddess, in parentheses, from the lion's dens, from the mountains of the leopards. Her womb is an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphor with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. Her hands, in quotes, dropped with myrrh. In parentheses, Adonis, we may remember, was born of the myrrh. Like the Holy Ghost, wisdom is given as a gift to the elect, an idea that is taken up again in the doctrine of the Paraclete.
Okay, and we ought to mention that the Paraclete is basically a synonym for the Holy Ghost.
Right.
And because Christ said that he as the Son of God had to leave, had to be gone in order for the Paraclete to come. And the Paraclete is the Holy Ghost, and the Paraclete enters everyone who follows Christ, certainly, but it actually comes down to all religions in one way or another. We just call it different things.
Well, completely. I'm glad you brought up the Paraclete as a synonym for the Holy Ghost, because that's another item in support of the Holy Ghost as a feminine force in the Trinity, and that she is faceless or ghostish symbolizes the creative agency. And it's interesting, that's a feminine force. So in a sense, that Paraclete is also that mouth in the origin, and that which brings life, which goes right to that pomegranate. Because when you crack open a pomegranate, there are all these seeds. Well, that would be the ovaries with all the eggs that have potential life in the fruit.
Right. And so I'm going to tell the punchline. I probably will tell it many times. But since we're talking about the Paraclete, and this is Christ's teaching about the Holy Ghost coming, it meant that the Holy Ghost, the Spirit of being God, would come into all human beings, or into all people who are following the Christian tradition anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I want to read a part of the very last paragraph of Answer to Job, since it's on this point. And you'll need to hear it maybe 20 times before you quite get it. But this is the punchline to the whole thing. So Jung says, and this is paragraph 758 of Answer to Job, there then arises that reciprocal action between two relatively autonomous factors, which compels us, when describing and explaining the processes, to present sometimes the one and sometimes the other factor as the acting subject, even when God becomes man. The Christian solution has hitherto avoided this difficulty by recognizing Christ as the one and only God-man. But the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person, in man brings about the Christification of many. And the question then arises whether these many are all complete God-men. Such a transformation would lead to insufferable collisions between them, to say nothing of the unavoidable inflation to which the ordinary mortal, who is not freed from original sin, would instantly succumb. In these circumstances, it is well to remind ourselves of St. Paul and his split consciousness. On one side, he felt he was the apostle directly called and enlightened by God, and on the other side, a sinful man who could not pluck out the thorn in the flesh and rid himself of the satanic angel who plagued him. That is to say, even the enlightened person remains what he is, and is never more than his own limited ego before the One, who dwells within him, whose form has no knowable boundaries, who encompasses him on all sides, fathomless as the abysms of the earth and vast as the sky. And so this is Jung saying that the fully realized person would recognize that we all have certain godlike features within us, and but manage your expectations, because you're still one ego up against the one, which you can't possibly fathom. So, all right.
Well, and it also makes the argument of how important ego strength is, and that doesn't mean egomaniacal, and also the one ego up against the capital O, one, O-N-E, mind inflation. Because if you get inflated in regards to divinity and such, you're soon going to pop, and then that's deflated, and then dissolution occurs. So I think back to, as you mentioned, the balance, that both
Right.
and balance.
Right. Okay. So Tora asks a decent question, and Justin replies, isn't language word thus communication exchange, and life is just that? And Justin replies, there are scientists today who totally agree. Life without communication does not and cannot exist. And so this is the duality that Jung was talking about in that last paragraph, which is, yes, we need discernment. Yes, we need communication. All those things happen in the logos, and they are symbolic of what is happening in your actual life. Okay. As I often say, a Bible's just a black doorstop unless somebody puts life into it. And so you can have all the words in all the libraries of the world, and you don't have life, because those words are symbolic of something that's happening in somebody's psyche, no matter what book you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, I mean, two things there. I think, one, civilization, when it's disconnected from nature for terribly too long, causes uncivilized behavior.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Because people are irritated. They may not know why, but you need nature, because we are nature. We're part of it. And if you remove something, basically if you kidnap it and imprison it somewhere, it's not going to be terribly happy. And I don't remember which woman scientist or sociologist it was, but when someone asked her where she thought the first historical communication of history was, and they said, was it with this language? And then she said it wasn't with language. It was the first fossil record of a healed femur that had been broken. Because if you break your leg out in nature, you die. And that the fact that it was healed means either they said it themselves, but they only said it themselves because they have been taught, which means there was a society somewhere, or someone helped them and set that bone. But the first healed broken bone was then an evolution of society. And I really resonated with that, because it took out all the logic and all the pecking order, which to me makes very, very poor order, out, and put in a fact that was living and real. And I think that was one of the stronger pieces of learning of, oh, she just incorporated life into the history.
Yeah, sure. That's a great one. All right, so I'm going to go on with paragraph 613 now. The pneumatic nature of Sophia. Okay, pneuma means what we're talking about within Eros. The pneumatic nature of Sophia, as well as her world-building Maya character, come out still more clearly in the apocryphal wisdom of Solomon. Quote, for wisdom is a loving spirit, unquote, and quote, kind to a man. She is the worker of all things. In her is an understanding spirit holy. She is the breath of the power of God, a pure effluence flowing from the glory of the Almighty, the brightness of the everlasting light, the unspotted mirror of the power of God, a being most subtle, who passeth and goeth through all things by reason of her pureness, She is conversant with God, and the Lord of all things himself loved her. And the Lord of all things himself loved her. Who of all that are is a more cunning workman than she? She is sent from heaven and from the throne of glory as a Holy Spirit. As a psychopomp, she leads the way to God and assures immortality. Okay. Jordan.
Yeah, I like the positive use of the psychopomp there, rather than being egomaniacal
and
dictator.
And it's fascinating in the play in which I'm performing in the summer. The very, very last thing that happens is that Jung follows his anima as a psychopomp.
Right.
It's the very last thing that happens to Jung in that play. Jung doesn't get the final punchline. Jung starts the play with the very first line, which is an argument. It's a logos style argument, and but the very last thing that happens to him in the play is that he's following his anima, which is the psychopomp.
Yeah. And the thing about that, it was so beautiful. Give credit where credit's due. He leads the way, and he starts off, but then he bows to turn to the creative agency where, give credit where credit's due. Give creativity where creativity makes it due.
Right. So we're not saying all that in the play, so it's only good for them that knows. And the play we're performing this summer is The Analyst and the Rabbi by Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich. Okay.
I think the one line too, that she is the worker of all things. In that line, that seeds the whole concept of Gaia, Gaia, nature as a living force.
Right. She is the worker. And that's why I say you can have every book in the world, and man, they just sit there on shelves unless you have some feminine. Right. They don't do much.
I have to bring them and stack them on my desk, or else they start to collect dust, over there on the shelf. It's like
right.
And then I'll go, I haven't looked at that.
That's what happens to the pure logos. So you can imagine the most complete library in the world, and not only with books, but I've been to the new library of Alexandria, Egypt, which is a phenomenal place. It's worth going to Egypt just for that. But it's in Alexandria, and it replaced the ancient Library of Alexandria. But it has connected with it 5 museums, and those museums, it's on. It's way beyond the Smithsonian, I would say, because they actually have the original artifacts, which the British Museum and the Smithsonian can only claim to have stolen. But
hidden in the basement.
Yeah, but all those things are also logos, and they just sit there in that museum and don't do a hell of a lot until the Eros comes into somebody who's a viewer, and you say, "Oh, now I got it." Right. Because otherwise all those artifacts, every book in the new Library of Alexandria just sits there and doesn't do anything until we put life into it. So that's the
right.
Okay. So
well, and that expresses that pneumatic nature, which is air, which is flowing. It's just like a pneumatic architectural structure is an air inflated dome typically. Right. And that is the pneuma or the pneumatic.
Okay, so let's go on. You want to take 614? Yeah.
Sure. Paragraph 614. The wisdom of Solomon is emphatic about God's justice and, probably not without pragmatic purpose, ventures to sail very close to the wind, in quotes, righteousness is immortal, but ungodly men with their works and words call death upon themselves, close quotes. The unrighteous and ungodly, however, say, let us oppress the poor righteous man. Let us not spare the widow, nor reverence the ancient gray hairs of the aged. Let our strength be the law of justice, for that which is feeble is found to be nothing worth. Therefore, let us lie in wait for the righteous, because he upbraideth with our offending the law, and objecteth to our infamy. He professeth to have the knowledge of God, and he calleth himself the child of the Lord. He was made to reprove our thoughts. Let us see if his words be true, and let us prove what shall happen in the end of him. Let us examine with despitefulness and torture, that we may know his meekness and prove his patience.
Yeah, well, this is a reference to karma also. Karma is a very balanced but very tough taskmaster, and karma is the Hindu and Buddhist word for what goes around comes around. And as I look at what is happening to these young Russian troops, who are doing these atrocities, they're never going to escape what they've done in their lifetime. Their PTSD is going to be horrible. And when I married Debbie, her father had served as a petty officer first class in the Navy during World War II, and he was at sea for 2 years on Liberty ships. He was they had installed 5-inch guns on the Liberty ships, and the Liberty ships would have like 5 Navy sailors there whose job it was to operate the gun, and this was my father-in-law's duty. And the point is that you can carry a big stick, but you have to speak softly. And if you don't, the point I was getting to was that he never talked about his experiences in World War II with Geneva, my mother-in-law, or with Debbie. And then when I came on the scene, because I was a retired Marine by then, or almost retired by then, he opened up about it, and he talked about all the things that he had done, and they were truly incredible what he had done. He had been on merchant ships in convoys for 2 years, and you go, oh my God. And one time he had a locomotive that was attached to the upper decks of the ship by chains, and they entered a storm, and the locomotive went off in the drink, just broke free and went into the sea. And but Geneva and Debbie had never heard those stories, and the reason is that after you've seen these horrible things of ships sinking and people drowning and all these things that did happen to these convoys, or even the sort of minor things that I saw, I did see people killed. I had a Marine die in my arms, actually. You just how do you talk about something like that? You can't. And so the karma comes back and gets you.
Well, and I think what's important about that too, not just the PTSD, and it's hard to talk about things like that in general, a lot of times for people, but also the fact that people who haven't been through that will think you're exaggerating, will think you're inflated, and in a sense try to talk you off that ledge when the reality is there is no ledge. That's logical, it's factual, it occurred, and you don't want to demean the history because it's not a discussion in terms of convincing. And so unless someone knows, they haven't played the scale of that intensity, and they'll try to call you on, oh, you must be exaggerating, and just even out of respect to the trouble, and the terror, even at times, I think people don't talk about it, not because they're closed, it's because it's not up for argument. It happens, and it's not, they're not going to be called crazy or a monster or anything. It's just something that's there.
Right. Now, Zen Mode HQ here has an interesting point. He says, Justin, so many call Jesus the word incarnate. Within the Zendavesta of Zoroastrians says, quote, I deliver unto thee a man to deliver me against mighty resurrection, who knows the revealed law, a wise and clever man, the word incarnate. That's from chapter 18, line 51. Keep in mind that Zendavesta Avesta was written about 300 years after the Torah and approximately 700 years prior to John's Gospel. These religions all having this common thread, this pattern is a thread Jung dared to pull on. Him along with Monty Python Hall, or Manly P. Hall, he's talking about, not Monty Python.
No, funny.
Along with Manly P. Hall, the word is shamajim, the word which hovered above the waters before creation. That is God's residence in the heavens, above the waters in the heavens, not referring to the waters of earth. Shamajim, that's when there are no words I can talk about PTSD. Yeah, well, we many of us can talk about PTSD in various ways, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about the emergence of the feminine. And
well, I'm glad he brought up Manly P. Hall, because Manly P. Hall is a wonderful resource. One of his other statements, I think, was when symbols are relearned to be read, and when the language of symbols is understood again, veils will lift from the eyes of humanity. And I think that's a very powerful concept, to bring the feminine, the symbols in.
Right. And it's important to understand that Dr. Jung was talking about consciousness. Now, when I started to read Jung, I thought I was conscious, and I had done all this education, all this logos education for my whole life up until then. And I realized that I was not conscious of all these things, including I had lost track of what religion is about. And I think a lot of 20th and 21st century men especially have lost track of what religion is about because of being too misguided by the habits of collective consciousness. And yet we don't have enough concept of what's really happening to us, which is that we're entering the fifth stage of consciousness. And you'll know you're there when you get there. But the 20th century is a testament to the inadequacy of the fourth level of consciousness. And the fourth level of consciousness allows something like Putin to happen. And until we can raise mankind up to a higher level of consciousness, we're going to be stuck with people like Putin in various places. I mean, even if we defeat him, who's a true threat to the species, there will be penny ante dictators all over the place, including in households. That's what spousal abuse is, and so on, for a long time until we wake people up.
Well, and there's a subtle distinction when people say, one must always take a position, because if you sit idly by, you've taken the position to support the oppressor. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out and bring them down, but the need for a perspective and an informed bias that informs your intuitions as to how to deal with, how to act, how to, take action is important, because I think it's like, it's what allows evil to continue is someone sitting idly by and just being subject to it. Mm-hmm. And that's, right. That's an important, some people think it's splitting hairs, but it's, when I say I'm taking a side, it doesn't mean I have to war. It means that I have a position, not an opinion, a position. Mm-hmm. Right. And that position is, feet on the ground standing, rather than an opinion is, again, that pneuma, then it's very airy.
Right. And so we, one could think that Skip, by his creation of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology reading group, is just off in some little corner, being, just avoiding conflict, but that isn't true at all. I feel like I'm a fighter every day, and the reason that I've spent the last year studying this play so that I can perform the role of Carl Jung in it is because I believe it's going to be a step in the right direction, and I'm very hopeful. So we have a new guest here in the Zoom chat.
Welcome.
And Dick, if you wish to say anything and join us, please do. You'll need to unmute your mic, however. And I hope you'll do that.
Well, and I think, that's going on if he's going to come out here and speak with us. It's interesting when you said, you're not off in some little corner. It reminds me of when I've been, someone attempts to cross-check me in an interview. If you're against all this logos and the matter and reasons are unreasonable, then why do you learn anything? And I always say, to inform my intuition. Mm-hmm. And because you can evolve how you respond from, at first, you learn when you're younger to react. And that's action reaction, but then response has the discretion of what do you include and how the creative agency performs. And I think in that situation where knowledge informs intuition, a musician friend of mine is fond of saying, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes performance. And they mean it up on stage. They never know what's going to happen or what they're going to do.
Right. Okay. So Dick has declined to be promoted to a panelist, but Dick, you are able to talk if you wish to. And you can also put in the Zoom chat comments that you wish to add, and only Jordan and I will see those comments unless we share them with somebody. So welcome, and we'll look forward to your participation. So Zen says, a symbol of the anima can be observed in the first name of God used, I, the Bible, Elohim, Aleph, Lamed, He, feminine God, Yod, Mem, final male God. It is a unification of opposites. Okay, well, yes. And of course, all the major religions actually, have become realized because they realize that there is this duality between the masculine and the feminine, and if you don't let the feminine breathe, you're not going to have much of a society, and you'll be gone in one generation. And
I'm going to refill my coffee. I'll be right back.
Right. Okay. And so Zen says, the next name of God that for God used is the same again, the tetragrammaton, Yod He, Yod male, He female, Yod He female, which is abbreviated as Yahweh by Gentiles, although I think most Jews will not even speak the name of God. Again, unification of the opposites, like Jung talks about in The Secret of the Golden Flower. Okay. So do you want to take 6:15?
6:15? Sure.
Yeah.
Where did we read but a short while before, and the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. Wisdom is better than might, saith the preacher.
Right. And the bully is a hard-boiled egg that's yellow inside. Okay, we'll read on here.
Yeah, hard-boiled egg is always yellow inside.
Because we're starting to get into a territory where Jung is rocking them and socking them here. So,
right.
Paragraph 616. Now, when I refer to paragraph 616, I'm referring to paragraph 616 in volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And so this book goes through about 205 paragraphs of that book, starting with 558, I think, or 553 maybe. I haven't looked back, but in any case, we're not halfway through yet. But if you don't have a copy of Answer to Job and you want to find it, you can go into our Dropbox and find an electronic copy of volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And we are next going into paragraph 616 of that volume. That's what this is that we're talking about. That's Answer to Job. Paragraph 616, not from mere thoughtfulness and unconsciousness, from a deeper motive, the wisdom of Solomon here touches on the sore spot. In order to understand this more fully, we would have to find out in what sort of relation the book of Job stands to the change that occurred in the status of Yahweh at about this same time, i.e., its relation to the appearance of Sophia. It is not a question of literary history, but of Yahweh's fate as it affects man. From the ancient records, we know that the divine drama was enacted between God and his people who were betrothed to him, the masculine dynamis, like a woman, and over whose faithfulness he watched jealously. A particular instance of this is Job, whose faithfulness is subjected to a savage test. As I have said, the really astonishing thing is how easily Yahweh gives in to the insinuations of Satan. If it were true that he trusted Job perfectly, it would be only logical for Yahweh to defend him, unmask the malicious slanderer, and make him pay for his defamation of God's faithful servant. But Yahweh never thinks of it, not even after Job's innocence has been proven. We hear nothing of a rebuke or a disapproval of Satan. Therefore, one cannot doubt Yahweh's connivance. His readiness to deliver Job into Satan's murderous hands proves that he doubts Job precisely because he projects his own tendency to unfaithfulness upon a scapegoat. There is reason to suspect that he is about to loosen his matrimonial ties with Israel, but hides this intention from himself. This vaguely suspected unfaithfulness causes him, with the help of Satan, to seek out the unfaithful one, and he infallibly picks on the most faithful of the lot, who is forthwith subjected to a grueling test. Yahweh has become unsure of his own faithfulness. Now, that's an important sentence, so let me add it here again. Yahweh has become unsure of his own faithfulness. So, Jordan.
Yeah, and that's an interesting spark of reactive consciousness. It's rather juvenile in a way, but at the same time, then at this point, God, Yahweh, is no longer only unconscious, but it's the consciousness of, say, a 4-year-old who's still prone to tantrum, but the awareness is starting to form that he's seeing a perspective outside of his faithfulness to then have choice, judgment, discernment, and begin to evolve the consciousness.
Right. And so we're talking here basically about the evolution of God, of
Right.
Yahweh. This is why Christians don't really talk about the Old Testament, because the God Yahweh went out of the New Testament, and
well, and God is differentiated here, because even in paragraph 615, it says, "And the Lord said to Satan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a blameless and upright man who fears God." There's two people there. So you have a seed that has dropped out in the sun, so to speak.
All right. So what's going on here when we talk about the divine drama? We're talking about the divine development of human consciousness.
Yes.
Within the psyche. And this is Jung's fundamental point throughout, which is that the only place God exists is in the psyche, or actually, I'm not pointing at the right place, because God exists everywhere, but the point is that the human psyche has become aware of God and is evolving God as they go along. And so go ahead, George.
I was going to say, I think it's important to note that even in the human brain, the synapse, the void, it's like a little baby, capital V, void between every neuron, where there's a leap of faith as each train car of a hop, electrically from one neuron to the other occurs, where the neuron would be that logos, except it's alive, the original logos. And then the synapse, I always call it the psychic synapse, because it's the little bitty baby void that is the messenger that there is something larger that is the same.
Yeah. And so also, I guess we'd be calling the neuron the masculine and the electron as the feminine here.
Oh, the synapse, not the electron.
Not the electron.
Oh, I'm thinking neuron, like a neural cell, like a nerve cell.
Yeah,
But actually,
that's got a lot of atoms in it, though.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a concept that people have to understand, that when we're talking at this level, something that is a cell already has millions, if not billions, of atoms in it.
Right, and then that space between is occurring at an even a more minute level all across that one nerve cell.
Right. Okay, so going on, let's read 6:17.
6:17. Okay. At about the same time, or a little later, it is rumored what has happened. He has remembered a feminine being who is no less agreeable to him than to man, a friend and playmate from the beginning of the world, the firstborn of all God's creatures, a stainless reflection of his glory and a master workman, nearer and dearer to his heart than the late descendants of the protoplast, the original man, who was but a secondary product stamped in his image. There must be some dire necessity responsible for this anamnesis of Sophia, or forgetting. Things simply could not go on as before. The, in quotes, just God could not go on committing injustices, and the, in quotes, omniscient could not behave any longer like a clueless and thoughtless human being. Self-reflection becomes an imperative necessity. And for this, capital W, wisdom is needed. Yahweh has to remember his absolute knowledge. For if Job gains knowledge of God, then God also must also learn to know himself. It just could not be that Yahweh's dual nature should become public property and remain hidden from himself alone. Whoever knows God has an effect on him. The failure of the attempt to corrupt Job has changed Yahweh's nature.
Right. Okay. And so what we're upon here, which takes 500 years to develop through the human species, is the idea that God is going to emerge and become man. And he's referred to as Son of Man. And what you find in the New Testament is Christ referred to 80 times at least, as Son of Man.
Rather than Son of God.
Right.
Right.
And which means he is the man that God has to become in order to understand what man is, what mankind is, and
there's Jung's concept
of it.
Yeah, Jung's concept of Christ as capital S self.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so going on, 6:18, we shall now proceed to reconstruct from the hints given in the Bible and from history what happened after this change. For this purpose, we must turn back to the time of Genesis and to the protoplast before the fall. He, Adam, produced Eve, his feminine counterpart, from his rib with the Creator's help, in the same way as the Creator had produced the hermaphroditic Adam from the prima materia, and along with him, the divinely stamped portion of humanity, namely the people of Israel and the other descendants of Adam. Mysteriously following the same pattern, it was bound to happen that Adam's first son, like Satan, was an evildoer and murderer before the Lord, so that the prologue in heaven was repeated on earth. It can easily be surmised that this was the deeper reason why Yahweh gave special protection to the unsuccessful Cain, for he was a faithful reproduction of Satan in miniature. Nothing is said about a prototype of the early departed Abel, who was dearer to God, turning page, sorry, than Cain, and go-ahead husbandman, who was no doubt instructed in these arts by one of Satan's angels. Perhaps this prototype was another son of God of a more conservative nature than Satan. No rolling stone with a fondness for new and black-hearted thoughts, but one who was bound to the Father in childlike love, who harbored no other thoughts except those that enjoyed paternal approval, and who dwelt in the inner circle of the heavenly economy. That would explain why his earthly counterpart, Abel, could so soon hasten away from the evil world, in the words of the Book of Wisdom, and return to the Father, while Cain, in his earthly existence, had to taste to the full the curse of his progressiveness on the one hand, and of his moral inferiority on the other. Jordan.
There's our conflicts today.
Yeah, it still is our conflict. And this is partially, I guess, why the churches don't like Jung, but we have to realize that a lot of them are basically selling themselves, those individuals. I had an interesting time yesterday because I was trying to write to the churches in Helena to make them aware of what we're doing in June and the play that we're performing in June. And more than half of the churches that I found were not any of the traditional denominations, like the traditional ones being Catholicism, Presbyterian, Reformed, Methodist, Episcopal, what have you. All those are the traditional religions. But more than half of the religions that are listed if you go on Google for Helena, are evangelical religions where they hide the credentials of the pastor, and I'm presuming that these guys are not, and they're primarily guys, although there are one or two women, but that they actually are not ordained by an official denomination of any church, and they're just self-selected preachers. And I'm not saying they're not doing good. They may be doing good. I can't make any judgment on that, but I was very surprised to see that these are self-elected preachers who are preaching the faith, and we have no credentials for them. So yes, they may be doing tremendous good for their congregations, and I can't deny that, but I have to express my surprise at that fact.
Well, in that case, we may need a sign outside where the play's going to go. It says, "Leave your torches at the door."
Yeah.
Or all are welcome, but leave your torches at the door.
Right. And so anyway, why don't you go ahead, Jordan, if you don't mind reading 619, which is, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a 2-page long.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite kind of paragraphs. That one goes
chapter, paragraph, but
this one has some legs. All right.
All right.
619.
I may interrupt you as you go, because this is a very meaty paragraph.
That sounds good. Yeah, a little moderation.
Some of the ones that we have to talk about in connection with this book. So go ahead.
Okay, paragraph 619. If the original father, Adam, is a copy of the creator, his son Cain is certainly a copy of God's son Satan. And this gives us a good reason gives us good reason for supposing that God's favorite, Abel, must also have his correspondence in a supracelestial place. The ominous happenings that occur right at the beginning of a seemingly successful and satisfactory creation, the fall and the fratricide, catch our attention, and one is forced to admit that the initial situation, when the Spirit of God brooded over the tohu bohu, hardly permits us to expect an absolutely perfect result. Furthermore, the Creator, who found every other day of his work good, in quotes, failed to give good marks to what happened on Monday. He simply said nothing, a circumstance that favors an argument from silence. What happened on that day was the final separation of the upper from the lower waters by the interposed, quote unquote, plate of the firmament. It is clear that this unavoidable dualism refused, then as later, to fit smoothly into the concept of monotheism, because it points to a metaphysical disunity. This split, as we know from history, has to be patched up again and again through the centuries, concealed and denied. It had made itself felt from the very beginning in paradise through a strange inconsequence which befell the Creator or was put over on him. Instead of following his original program of letting man appear on the last day as the most intelligent being and Lord of all creatures, he created the serpent, who proved to be much more intelligent and more conscious than Adam, and in addition, had been created before him. We can hardly suppose that Yahweh would have played such a trick on himself. It is far more likely that his son Satan had a hand in it. He is a trickster and spoilsport who loves nothing better than to cause annoying accidents. Although Yahweh had created the reptiles before Adam, they were common or garden snakes, highly unintelligent, from among whom Satan selected a tree snake to use as his disguise. From then on, the rumor spread that the snake was the most spiritual animal. Later, the snake became the favorite symbol of the nous, N-O-U-S, received high honors, and was even permitted to symbolize God's second son, because the latter was interpreted as the world-redeeming Logos, which frequently appears as identical with the nous. A legend of later origin maintains that the snake in the Garden of Eden was Lilith, Adam's first wife, with whom he begot a horde of demons. This legend likewise supposes a trick that can hardly have been intended by the Creator. Consequently, the Bible knows only of Eve as Adam's legitimate wife. It nevertheless remains a strange fact that the original man, who was created in the image of God, had, according to tradition, 2 wives, just like his heavenly prototype. Just as Yahweh is legitimately united with his wife Israel, but has a feminine pneuma as his intimate playmate from all eternity. So Adam first has Lilith, in parentheses, the daughter or emanation of Satan, close parentheses, to wife, as a satanic correspondence to Sophia. Eve would then correspond to the people of Israel. We naturally do not know why we should hear at such a late date that the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, is not only feminine, but a comparatively independent being who exists side by side with God. And that long before the marriage with Yahweh had relations with Sophia. Nor do we know why, in the older tradition, the knowledge of this first alliance had been lost. Likewise, it was only quite late that one heard of the delicate relationship between Adam and Lilith. Whether Eve was as troublesome a wife for Adam as the children of Israel, who were perpetually flirting with unfaithfulness, were for Yahweh, is equally dark to us. At any rate, The family life of our first parents was not all beer and Skittles. So that word's been around a little longer than the candy. Their first two sons are a typical pair of hostile brothers, for at that time it was apparently still the custom to live out mythological motifs in reality. In parentheses, nowadays this is felt to be objectionable and is denied whenever it happens. The parents can share the blame for original sin. Adam has only to remember his demon princess, and Eve should never forget that she was the first to fall for the wiles of the serpent. Like the fall, the Cain-Abel intermezzo can hardly be listed as one of creation's shining successes. One must draw. I love it when he has a sense of humor. One must draw this conclusion because Yahweh himself did not appear to be informed in advance of the above mentioned incidents. Here, as later, there is reason to suspect that no conclusions were ever drawn from omniscience. Yahweh did not consult his total knowledge and was accordingly surprised by the result. One can observe the same phenomenon in human beings, wherever, in fact, people cannot deny themselves the pleasure of their emotions. One can observe the same phenomenon in human beings, wherever, in fact, people cannot deny themselves the pleasure of their emotions. It must be admitted that a fit of rage or a sulk has its secret attractions. Were that not so, most people would long since have acquired a little wisdom.
I'm sorry I didn't stop you on that one, but
no, it kept going, and it to me it's interesting. I assumed there was going to be a break, but that's one nice full idea that he penned there.
Yeah.
And you could see he got a little tired because he started chuckling himself. And he starts taking pot shots towards the end in really good ways.
Right. So the point is that if God knows everything, if Yahweh knows everything,
right,
he's not consulting his knowledge when he lets this stuff happen, and so we start to get into why Job, why this book exists in the Bible at all, I suppose, because obviously the fathers of the church and the fathers of the temple recognized that this was happening in the divine drama of the human being.
Yeah, and I think that's the unsquared circle of the alchemist, right. Before the time before consciousness, because in that sense, omniscience and omnipresence, you could call it unconscious, but from a human perspective, I would call it indecisive.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, because it's everything all the time. We'll choose. Well,
yeah, and later on, Jung does talk about the fact of the hundreds of millions of years that it took to develop the other species in Africa, and hundreds of millions of years of devouring and begetting. And he says that's a sign of a dim consciousness.
Yeah. He couldn't get the sandbox to get started.
Right. And so what we're starting to see here now is that God is created in man's image, not man created in God's image. And because it's only men that are writing this stuff down.
Yeah, animals don't have time for that BS,
Yeah. Right. And interesting, Zen says the significance of the snake is huge. John 3:14, Christ says he will be lifted up like the snake. And in Numbers, Moses lifted up a bronze snake to heal snake bites. And Moses also carried a stave with snake, I envision it as a cobra on its pinnacle on the walking stick. And what I have interpreted this metaphor to be is that in any group you will have dissenters who are plotting to based on the power devil to break down the society and to take it for themselves, and that is the living snakes. But Moses had a brass snake made for his walking stick, saying, "I got you guys. I know what you're doing." And
and he's got the power of love versus their love of power.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take on this next paragraph. I think the last one was fairly clear.
Yeah,
right.
I appreciate too the comment on the serpent being of important and bringing those other verse passages in on the YouTube. Thank you. And one quick thing, because he mentions the nous, N-O-U-S. In French, nous is we, and at the same time, nous, the Nassines, N-A-A-S. Nas is a serpent or snake, and the Nassines were snake worshippers. So it's interesting how that word nous or nu to nos kind of plays around syllabically. I don't know what the original and previous languages were, but it's an interesting English correspondence, I think, between the nous we're speaking of and then the nos and the Nassines.
And of course, it's interesting that fundamentalists now, do play around with snakes occasionally, and every so often one of them bites them.
Right.
So
well, and there's the whole thing of the man who runs up and sees the snake on the big branch of the tree that's on fire, and he rescues the snake, and the snake says thank you and slithers away, and then a year later sees the same snake and on a tree that's on fire, and he rescues the snake, and the snake says thank you and bites him. And he said, I rescued you. Why did you do that? He goes, that's what snakes do.
Yeah, right. John Zen says, John the Baptist said the Pharisees were a pit of vipers, and Christ said he must be lifted up as the snake. Okay. Well, it's also the pharmacon, of course, which relates to the caduceus, which is the symbol of
the two snake of medicine.
Right, the two snakes of medicine. And the point is that one of the snakes is poison, but they switch back and forth. Sometimes they're poison and sometimes they're not. And that's what's happening as the snakes are going up the caduceus. And so you can't just say that snake venom is always bad, because it's not always bad in some situations.
Well, it's interesting you brought up the caduceus, because if I quickly just draw this, see if it'll show with my background. Let me turn the background off.
Yeah.
That is the astrological symbol for Asclepius. And it is an abstracted caduceus with the two snakes going up the staff. And so there's, I think, correspondence to what you were saying there too, the pharmacon.
Right. Then says, Adam and Eve realizing they were naked means that they were self-aware. It's the hallmark of consciousness. Then God makes the first sacrifice of animal hide to hide their nakedness. That's interesting. Okay. All right, so reading on paragraph 620. Okay, we need to get through paragraph 620 and 21 here. So 620, I'm going to blast through, and then 621 is the punchline. From this point of view, we may be in a better position to understand what happened to Job. In the pleromatic, or as the Tibetans called it, bardo state, there is a perfect interplay of cosmic forces. But with the creation, that is, with the division of the world into distinct processes in space and time, events began to rub and jostle one another. Covered by the hem of the paternal mantle, Satan soon starts putting a right touch here and a wrong touch there, thus giving a rise to complications, which were apparently not intended by the creator's plan and which come as surprises. While unconscious creation, animals, plants, and crystals, functions satisfactorily, so far as we know, things are constantly going wrong with man. At first, his consciousness is only a very little higher than that of the animals, but for which reason his freedom of will is also extremely limited. But Satan takes an interest in him and experiments with him in his own way, leading him into all sorts of wickedness, which his angels teach him, the arts and sciences, which until now have been reserved for the perfection of the pleroma. Even in those days, Satan would have merited a name, the name of Lucifer. The peculiar, unforeseen antics of men arouse Yahweh's wrath and thereby inform him in his own creation. Divine interventions become a compelling necessity. Irritatingly enough, they only meet with temporary success. Even the draconian punishment of drowning all life with a few choice exceptions, a fate which, according to old Johann Jacob Scheuser, on the evidence of the fossils, not even the fishes escaped, had no lasting effect. Creation remained just as tainted as before. The strange thing is that Yahweh invariably seeks the reason for this in man, who apparently refuses to obey, but never in his son, the father of all tricksters. This false orientation cannot fail to exasperate his already touchy nature. So the fear of God is regarded by man in general as a principle and even as the beginning of all wisdom. While mankind tried under this hard discipline to broaden their consciousness by acquiring a modicum of wisdom, that is, a little foresight and reflection, it is clear from the historical development that Yahweh had lost sight of his pleromatic coexistence with Sophia since the days of creation. Her place was taken by the covenant with the chosen people, who were thus forced into the feminine role. At this time, the people consisted of a patriarchal society in which women were only a secondary importance. God's marriage with Israel was therefore an essentially masculine affair, something like the founding of the Greek polis, which occurs about the same time. The inferiority of women was a settled fact. Woman was regarded as less perfect than man, as Eve's weakness for the blandishments of the serpent amply proved. Perfection is a masculine desiderata, while woman inclines by nature to completeness. Okay, so that's an important concept in Jungian thought, which is perfection is a masculine desideratum, while woman inclines by nature to completeness. And it is a fact that even today a man can stand a relative state of perfection much better and for a longer period than a woman, while as a rule it does not agree with women and may even be dangerous for them. If a woman strives for perfection, she forgets the complementary role of completeness, which, though imperfect by itself, forms the necessary counterpart to perfection. For just as completeness is always imperfect, so perfection is always incomplete, and therefore represents a final state which is hopelessly sterile. Ex perfecta nihil fit, say the old masters, whereas the imperfectum carries within it the seeds of its own improvement. Perfectionism always ends in a blind alley, which while completeness by itself lacks selective values. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, and very, very interestingly, way back even then, it started that they're saying a man can, stand perfection for longer than a woman. Well, because it's unnatural. So men can go to that blind alley so easily because they're only a piece. And then all this disparagement of Eve, for being quote unquote deceived. She wasn't deceived. She was more curious and had more wonderment and more free will than Adam. Adam basically just supplied the rib, call him an organ donor to the birth of consciousness. And what's interesting is all this has that patriarchal feel still all running through its veins and its arteries. And the reality is, I think Eve had, like I said, more free will. She had more curiosity, more wonderment, and actually more of an impetus to act on what she was thinking. Whereas Adam is kind of this timid, undeveloped little boy, and Eve and Lilith are both the ones striking out, and go figure, they also had the ability to give life. So I think the allegedly, second-class citizen of the woman back then was basically a patriarchal jealousy of little boys who did not understand how to be unthreatened by strength.
Right. Okay, so let's have you read 621. We're gonna stop here, but this is
we've got punchline land, right?
Yeah, this is the punchline landing. So go ahead and read 621.
Okay. At the bottom of Yahweh's marriage with Israel is a perfectionist intention, which excludes that kind of relatedness we know as, in quotes, eros. The lack of eros, of relationship to values, is painfully apparent in the book of Job. The paragon of all creation is not a man, but a monster. Yahweh has no eros, no relationship to man, but only to a purpose. Only to a purpose man must help him fulfill. But that does not prevent him from being jealous and mistrustful like any other husband. Though even here, he has his purpose in mind and not man.
Right. Okay. So that's the point, that if you allow the masculine to run amok, what you get is a monster, which is right. Abusive husbands and that sort of thing on the micro level. And so you need both a desire to perfect, but also relatedness, and that needs to be balanced against the idea of perfection. And
definitely. And the fact that Sophia, the wisdom, has basically been cast down or has cascaded down past the firmament to become Israel, this patriarchy. It's interesting because then that is the female not only gave birth to culture, the female was the one who differentiated. The one, Sophia, became the many Israel. So concept of pluribus, out of the one many, or out of many, one. And what's interesting about that is, all this, fanfare and cheerleading, pom pom, rah rah, we're number one, egomaniacal perfection BS. Perfection is impossible. But if I ran the sarea and got to perfection, wow, how boring would that be? I don't want a friend like that.
And that's what Jung refers to as sterile here.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's a final state. For just as completeness is always perfect, so perfection is always incomplete, and therefore represents a final stage which is hopelessly sterile. So you actually don't want perfection, because if you get there, you're a eunuch.
You're a eunuch, and also that perfection is the monster, and the monster must learn from its creations.
Yeah.
I mean, that's even the devil card in the tarot. The one in charge there is not the devil. It's the masculine and the feminine that are informing the, love of power goat ego about the power of love, of interrelation rather than warring.
Yeah.
So in one sense, war is a lower grade form of eros, and then love is its evolution higher.
Yeah. So what we can say, let's put this in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war at the moment. Let's suppose that Putin were to achieve his aims and take over Ukraine. So what does that get him, right? Because it becomes quite sterile, because, who's going to talk to him about it and adulate him when people realize what he's done? And, if he keeps killing off his oligarchs, he won't even have his cronies to give him attaboys. So that becomes pretty sterile.
Well, and also it's a bonehead move. Even if I step past the natural gas stores in West Ukraine that have been known about since at least 2013, and I get past the follow the money part, well, where's he going after that? This is not Genghis Khan time. That's not going to be, that's not something that you can't. It's really hard to have a surprise attack anymore. I mean, you can, but at the same time, what's he going to do? He's going to slowly, come Crimea and Ukraine, and where's he going next? What's the point? So the thing is, to take a single step to just kind of edge out to try to take over Ukraine, to me, it's a bonehead move, and also they picked on the wrong quiet kid.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that kid has been trained by Bruce Lee, all the philosophers, and also that kid has a wicked sense of humor.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
Zelensky is a powerhouse, and he's calm in his intensity, and
he's definitely a force of nature, boy.
Yeah, well, if you see how he played the piano years back, like on his show, that was quite there. I don't know if you've seen.
I didn't see that, but so what did he do? Tell us.
He played the piano with his penis.
Oh my God!
So this is someone who's really not afraid of much of anything.
I wouldn't think. My goodness, holy smokes! No, I hadn't seen that, but
I haven't seen it, and I gather it's not Mozart, and probably not even chopsticks, but it's like, well, unless he's a shark and he has two, it's like. So.
Well, people like that, people from that part of the world are quite matter of fact about sexuality, it turns out.
Which is very capital in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's where the advance of Christianity stopped in Novgorod, because there's no way to beat the pagan out of people who depend on nature.
Yeah.
And that means then they are smarter. And because, what is it on the Mediterranean? If you have a, bad bad crop, you just go fishing. Well, in Novgorod, you have a bad crop and you die. So there's life and death is in the balance of not being prude.
Yeah.
Literally.
Well, so what we see is that the American military establishment was pretty wrong about the collective significance of Ukraine. And, they could have known, because Ukraine has been picked on for hundreds of years. And, those folks can't like that. And,
right.
Even though Belarusia has been supportive of Putin officially, it's the Belarusian trainmen who sabotaged the railroads so that Putin couldn't resupply his army.
Right.
Geez, don't you think we could do that again? Maybe. Or the Ukrainians could do that again? Probably so. And
well, and the thing is the fact that the Ukrainian farmers, anywhere there's a Russian convoy at any time, some Ukrainian farmer is just going to walk out or drive the tractor out from the side, through the trees. And before they can turn the take around, they're pushing it off the road or wherever, or et cetera, et cetera. You talk about when industry basically supports a war. In the United States, all the automobile factories started creating weapons and such in World War II. All the metallurgists in Ukraine, all the welders, they've turned around to make anti-tank, defenses, and and their recycling programs now for glass bottles are to make Molotov cocktails.
Yep.
And they just turned every little piece. And it's not, I don't find Ukraine to have guerrilla warfare. I think they have creative and very actionable actions. I can't respect Ukraine enough.
Me either. I think it's been the quiet secret for a long while. And
and I go back to the, sorry, Putin, but you should have vetted who you go picking on the playground.
And I know that the U.S. has been training Ukrainians since forever, because I remember myself being at the National War College when I was still an active reservist, and there were Ukrainian officers in our class then, and that was 35 years ago.
Right.
It was a long while ago. And so, we have trained a lot of Ukrainians over the years. And as I think about it, I never remember seeing a Russian officer in any of our senior schools, but I did see Ukrainians. And so some of the bonehead mistakes that the Russian military is making are just unbelievable. This was blind to me, because nobody ever told me that they had these flaws, but we were always lined up on the East Coast of the U.S. to be the left flank of NATO in the event of an attack by Russia into NATO. And so I'm sure that would happen even today. And so, I should have put two and two together, but I'm sure someone has, and that was classified information even then. And so this is why we can give the Ukrainians large numbers of weapons and know that they will know how to use them. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, and also that with training come mistakes, but not rookie mistakes.
Yeah.
And rookie mistakes mostly come from untraining or lack of training or poor equipment, because you aren't able to respond properly.
Right, and lack of NCOs, that
Right.
is
That's a
such a
huge
big
missing
thing.
piece.
Yeah, because you can have all the privates in the world, but if they don't have a non-commissioned officer there to push them along, they're not going to know what to do. And
Well, and they need to not have to know what to do. And it's not so much telling them with orders, it's giving them a mission so they can forget about the mission and go do the mission. And instead of trying to figure out the strategy, wasting that time, and then going and doing it, the people on the front aren't necessarily needing to be business owners, market and do the work themselves. I mean, kind of thing. It gets differentiated across.
Right. So the reason that so many generals have been killed on the Russian side is because they have to be way forward trying to direct traffic when they shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
And they should be thinking instead of doing, when you get up to that level. And so it's going to be a very interesting couple of months going forward. So anyway, I need to wrap this up. We have.
Thanks for today. This was good.
Yeah. Okay. So next week we will resume with paragraph 622, right? And thank you everyone for joining us. This has been enjoyable, and I'm glad that we've seen some of our many friends here today. And don't forget our confluence, which is coming up in just about 7 weeks, I guess, because this will be a one and only chance to go to Yellowstone with Tim Holmes and some other locals, which will be worth the price of admission, no doubt. And there are going to be a lot of interesting folks there. I can say that for sure. So I'm just going to put the link again, so anybody can find it, what it is we're doing. And there will be a lull in our regular classes during that time. And some parts of the confluence will be broadcast live, but not all. And if you rely on that, then you're missing all the serendipity opportunities to talk to people between sessions, which is the real juice and value of the confluence. So we hope you can come. So having said that, we'll sign off for today. Thanks, Jordan.
Definitely. Glad to be here.
And good luck with the win today.
Thank you very much.